like Dr. Nayert said, remote work pre-COVID and during COVID, where people were not prepared globally to move to working from home, which is their dining room, living room, kitchen, along with the other distractions that came with it. Prior to COVID of March of 2020, 44% of companies around the world did not allow remote work. And in the United States, approximately only 2.9% of people worked remotely. Research has shown that employees are more productive in the virtual environment, and this is based on some of the updates that come from the Outlook and the Cortanas and some of the tracking devices that are built into the softwares as part of like Microsoft Office, and as well as other surveys that are being done in the workplace. But there's concerns that people who might have children at home or other family members that they need to care for, that they have distractions and they don't have a quiet workspace that could negatively influence their productivity and contribute to some of their stress levels. So the purpose of this study is to gain an understanding of how an employee's job satisfaction and productivity changed while working remotely. It'll measure if they were satisfied with their job before and how they felt during. Originally, I wanted to do a post-COVID, but since we're still in the middle of the pandemic and not everything has fully reopened, I had to move forward with just pre and during. And so the main research questions are to understand if there's a difference in job satisfaction of those working remotely versus when they were working on site, as well as exploring does employee productivity vary based on location? Does their job satisfaction vary? And is there a difference for people if whether they live in a city or rural area or whether they travel? And by travel, meaning there's a lot of people who've been working remotely and they've been going to Airbnbs and renting them out for a week or a month, or they've been leaving the country to go to other places such as Aruba, where they're putting extended visa, they're waiving the requirements of taxes and allowing people to come in. So there's a lot of people who have gone on travel trips because they're still able to complete their job remotely. And so the other question that we're going to look at is, does the decision to continue to work remotely differ by gender or age category? If people have the choice of working remotely once the pandemic's over, or do they want to return to the office? And so the deficiency of the literature when I started this project was that there was not a lot of stuff geared towards business personnel. There's a lot towards healthcare, there's a lot towards frontline essential workers, and there's a lot towards education, but nothing for business people. And that's completely different industries than the others. So the materials and methods, I'm using a mixed method approach. I did a pilot study as part of my Competency 2 class, and I developed a survey that had closed-ended and open-ended questions, and it was distributed electronically through LinkedIn and Facebook just to my local connected people that I had. There was, with the survey, they could answer for if they had an extenuating circumstance or something they wanted to add to it. So for example, I found out that one person retired during COVID. And so other people were able to provide recommendations of what they thought were best practices and that we could implement as part of the recommendations for the project and the research. For the calculations, I used some ANOVA calculations and correlations to see if there was any significance. Unfortunately, and I'll cover it in the results section. Fortunately, my pilot, I had no significance. I did learn a lot, and so I have those future recommendations and the conclusions, which I'll address. And also, I had a spot for people to do a follow-up interview, but since this was just a pilot, I did not explore that further. What I'm planning for my dissertation is to use 2 surveys that are already validated and reliable for each of the main platforms of job satisfaction and productivity. So I've kind of corrected some of that for the future research. And that's pretty much materials and methods that I used. The results had 14 people who expressed interest. I actually had 10 people who completed the survey. 9 were females, 1 was male. So it kind of threw out some of my gender questions because I didn't have an equal representation on the gender. Age range of participants was 30 to 59 years old. One participant had been laid off and furloughed. And another thing that I want to measure too is there possibly a relationship between job satisfaction and those who were laid off or furloughed versus people who worked the entire time? As I mentioned before, one retired. 50% of the participants could work remote prior to the pandemic, and so there wasn't much shift for them. But during the pandemic, 90% could work remotely. And then one thing that really threw off my data was I had 30% of participants were involved in the education industry. So because that's typically performed on site, most of these people were like elementary school teachers. They were eager to return to work. So it kind of threw off that, do they want to continue working remotely? So I plan to exclude education workers in the future for the research. And then for my research questions, like I mentioned, there was no significance for the questions of the pilot study. Some of the common themes that had emerged was having a dedicated workspace for focus, set working hours, and do not work past them to avoid burnout. A lot of people found they were putting in more hours per day while they were working from home because they felt they needed to stay up to date on everything, but they didn't have a cut between their personal and their work life, so that balance started lacking. And others recommended communicating with the employer for ergonomic needs. And some people also had their employer give them a budget to order what they needed to build out a workspace, like a desk, dual monitors, and extra like docking stations or whatever they needed to be successful at home. So in conclusion, the research will be able to build on the issues that I've identified. And I've already spoken of some of how I plan to proceed for my next round. There was insights on best practices. Practitioners can help design the work remote situations to set their employees up for success and do certain things that will contribute to job satisfaction and productivity. I cover some of that in the paper that is also, I don't know, I submitted that for this, so I don't know where that's at, if that will be distributed or available. I would recommend, as mentioned, excluding the education industry and also excluding people who did retire because that doesn't provide a continuity for the data. And I already addressed the issues of validating the tools. And this has, the original survey tool needs some clarification based on the answers not being fully encompassing of what certain participant situations. And I'm working to revise that as well. And so this is a work in process, and I'm excited to continue it forward into my dissertation.